and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. About 8 years ago, my brother was driving home after spending the night drinking with some friends. We live in a suburb of Houston, Texas, so the road he was using was not some isolated country route surrounded by miles of empty fields. It passed through an ordinary suburban area with neighborhoods, businesses, schools, streetlights, and plenty of traffic during the day. At 3 in the morning, though, even a familiar suburban road can feel deserted. Most houses were dark. Very few cars were out, and the normal daytime noise had disappeared. The buildings and fences along the road were visible only when his headlights passed over them. My brother should not have been driving after drinking. There is no excuse for that, and the alcohol is important when considering what he later claimed to see. His judgment, vision, and memory may all have been affected. That was one of the first things I thought when he told me the story. But it was not only the sighting itself that disturbed me. It was the condition he was in when he reached home. And the similar account I heard from someone completely separate only a few days later. According to my brother, he was about 5 minutes from our house when he noticed something in the middle of the road. At first, it looked like a large person hunched over near the pavement. He slowed down as he approached. He thought it might be a homeless man, someone injured, or a person intoxicated and wandering into traffic. From a distance, the figure's exact shape was difficult to understand. It was low to the ground, with its shoulders or upper body bent forward. My brother kept driving toward it. He expected the person to notice the headlights and move out of the road. Instead, the figure remained where it was. As the car got closer, it began to stand. That was when my brother realized how large it was. It rose far higher than he expected. He described it as massive, much larger than an ordinary person. He could not give me an exact height, partly because he remained inside the moving car and partly because the encounter happened quickly. But he was certain it was not a normal-sized man. The figure had been hunched over so deeply that its full height remained hidden until it straightened. Then it looked directly at him. My brother was specific about that part. He did not say it looked toward the headlights or reacted generally to the approaching vehicle. He said it looked through the windshield and focused on him. Its eyes appeared red, not slightly bloodshot or reflecting a weak orange color. They seemed to glow. The red eyes were the clearest feature he remembered. The rest of the body was dark and difficult to identify, but those eyes were visible as the figure watched him approach. He said the feeling was different from encountering an animal. A deer may freeze and stare into headlights. A dog or coyote might turn its head toward the sound of an engine. This thing seemed to recognize that a person was behind the wheel. It was not looking at the car. It was looking at him. My brother continued moving closer, either because he was too shocked to stop or because there was not enough time to make another decision. Then, the figure leaped. Beside the road was the fence surrounding a local elementary school. The fence and the school property were familiar to us. It was not an unknown landmark my brother could easily misjudge. According to him, the figure jumped from the middle of the road cleared the fence, and landed inside the school grounds. He estimated the leap covered around 25 feet. It did not climb. It did not place its hands on the top and pull itself over. It launched itself across the distance in one movement. Once it landed, it ran away across the school property. My brother did not stop to watch where it went. He drove home as quickly as he could. Our house was only about 5 minutes away. When he arrived, he rushed inside and slammed the front door hard enough to wake both my father and me. I opened my bedroom door after hearing the noise. From where I stood, I heard my brother running up the stairs. He passed me on the way to his room. The way he looked is the main reason I did not dismiss the story immediately. My brother had a reputation for lying, exaggerating, and making up stories for entertainment. He was what I would call a perpetual bullshitter. If he told me he had seen something unbelievable, my first instinct was usually to assume he was joking or trying to get a reaction. But that night, he did not look amused. He looked terrified. His face was pale, his movements were rushed, and there were tears in his eyes. He looked like someone who had just escaped something. I followed him and asked what happened. At first, he had difficulty calming down enough to explain it. Then he described a large figure in the road. He told me how it stood up. He described the glowing red eyes and the feeling that it stared directly at him. Finally, he explained how it jumped over the elementary school fence and disappeared. I did not know what to believe. Alcohol could explain a great deal. My brother had been drinking. It was 3 in the morning, and he was tired. Those conditions can distort distance, size, color, and movement. A dark animal in the road might look much larger than it really was. Headlights can make eyes shine red, orange, green, or white, depending on the species and angle. A deer, large dog, coyote, or escaped exotic animal might crouch in the road and then leap across a fence. If my brother was intoxicated and frightened, an ordinary jump could have seemed like an impossible 25-foot leap. The figure might also have been a person wearing dark clothes. Someone bending down to pick something up could appear strangely shaped. If they climbed or jumped over a fence quickly, my brother's memory might simplify the movement into one huge leap. A mixture of alcohol, poor lighting, speed, and panic could transform a strange but ordinary event into something monstrous. That was the explanation I wanted to accept. The problem was his reaction. I had seen my brother lie many times. He usually enjoyed the performance. He smiled, added dramatic details, and watched to see whether people believed him. This was different. He did not seem proud of the story. He looked embarrassed by how frightened he was. The tears in his eyes were not part of a joke. Whatever he saw, or believed he saw, had terrified him. For the next few days, I kept thinking about it. I did not immediately decide that a supernatural creature was roaming the suburbs of Houston. I assumed my brother had encountered an animal and misidentified it. Texas has plenty of wildlife. Large deer can appear almost impossible in the road when they suddenly rise from a crouched position. Their eyes reflect light strongly, and they can jump over high fences with ease. A deer's leap can cover a surprising distance. At night, if the antlers were not visible or if it stood at an unusual angle, my brother might have interpreted the body as humanoid. That seemed possible. Feral hogs are also large and can move with shocking speed, though they do not stand upright like people or clear fences in the way he described. A big cat, such as a cougar, could leap a significant distance, although a cougar's shape would not usually be mistaken for a towering, upright figure. An owl flying up from the road might create the impression of something rising, and its eyes could appear red in reflected light. but the size would be wrong. There were enough possibilities that I tried to put the story aside. A few days later, I was at work talking with a friend. We were casually discussing strange experiences, and I decided to tell her what my brother had claimed. I did not present it as fact. I probably mentioned that he had been drinking and that he often made things up. I described the location, the time, and the large figure crouched in the road. As I began explaining what it looked like, my friend interrupted me. She asked, did it have glowing red eyes? I had not mentioned the eyes yet. Her question immediately got my attention. I asked why she would say that. She told me her brother had experienced something similar only a few days earlier. He had been driving home from work at night on the same road. His encounter happened about 6 miles from where my brother saw the figure. According to my friend, her brother also saw something large and unnatural near the road. It had glowing red eyes. I do not know every detail of his sighting because I heard the story secondhand. I cannot say whether he described the same height, posture, or leap, but the road and timing were close, and the red eyes matched before I had mentioned them. That changed how I viewed my brother's story. My friend had no reason to support a lie he invented. Her brother's encounter apparently happened before she heard anything from me. Unless my brother had somehow shared the story with people connected to her, the two accounts developed independently. The encounters were separated by only a few days and several miles along the same road. That does not prove both men saw the same creature. Similar conditions can produce similar mistakes. Drivers on the same road might encounter the same type of animal. If deer commonly crossed there, both men could have seen deer at night and interpreted the eyeshine as red. One animal might have moved along the area over several days. An escaped exotic pet could also travel several miles. The matching descriptions may have had an ordinary explanation. Still, the timing made the coincidence difficult to ignore. I returned home and spoke with my brother again. I told him about my coworker's question and her brother's experience. He did not become excited or treat it as proof that his story was impressive. He remained unsettled. That reaction stayed with me. There is a difference between wanting people to believe a story and wishing the event had never happened. My brother seemed closer to the second kind. Over time, I tried to identify animals that could fit what he saw. A large owl was one possibility people suggested. Owls can have bright eyeshine, and when spreading their wings from the ground, they may appear suddenly enormous. Their faces can also look disturbingly human. An owl taking flight over a fence might seem like a creature leaping. But my brother described a figure that stood upright before jumping. He said it had a large body, not only wings. Another possibility was a deer. This remains one of the strongest explanations. White-tailed deer live around suburban Houston and often move at night. A large buck can rise from a lowered feeding position and appear much taller than expected. Their eyes can reflect red under certain lighting conditions. Deer can jump fences easily and cover 25 feet in a running leap. If one stood in the middle of the road, looked through the windshield, and jumped into the school grounds, the basic event would match. Fear and alcohol could have changed the deer's outline into something humanoid. The problem is that my brother knew what deer looked like. We were not living in a place where he had never seen one. He insisted the figure did not have the body shape of a deer. He described it as something that first looked like a large, hunched person. When it stood, it seemed taller and broader than a man. Could a deer seen from the front create that impression? Possibly. Its legs and neck might combine into a strange silhouette. The antlers could disappear into the darkness. But the transformation from crouched person to massive upright creature remains difficult to picture. A large dog or coyote seems less likely. They can have red eyeshine and might jump a fence. but they would not stand tall enough. A black bear could rise onto its hind legs and look enormous, and bears can climb or cross fences. However, black bears are not common in suburban Houston, and my brother described a single clean leap rather than climbing. An escaped primate sounds more similar to a hunched figure standing upright, but there were no reports of a large ape loose in the area. Even an escaped chimpanzee or gorilla would be unlikely to clear a 25-foot distance in one jump, and someone would probably have reported it. Then there are the more unusual explanations. Some people might call the figure a cryptid, demon, shapeshifter, or something connected to local folklore. Glowing red eyes and impossible jumping ability appear in many stories about unexplained creatures. The problem with using those labels is that they can make a vague encounter seem more specific than it was. My brother did not describe wings, horns, claws, or a detailed face. He saw a large, dark shape, red eyes, and a huge leap. Anything beyond that would be added later. I have tried not to turn his experience into a creature legend. There was no photograph. No footprints were collected. No one searched the school grounds for marks. My brother did not report it to police or animal control. By the time daylight came, there was probably nothing to investigate. Even if tracks existed, students, staff, weather, and normal activity could have erased them. The event remained only a story told by someone who had been drinking. If the second sighting had never happened, I probably would have dismissed it completely. That matching account is what continues to bother me. My coworker stopped me before I mentioned the red eyes. Her question came naturally, as though she already knew the detail. She was not trying to guess what a monster might look like. She was recognizing something her brother had described. The same road is also significant. 6 miles is not far for an animal, person, or vehicle. If something was moving through the area, it could easily appear at both locations within a few days. That supports a natural explanation as much as a supernatural one. A large deer with unusually red eye shine might have crossed the road repeatedly. An injured animal could behave strangely. A person playing a prank might move to different locations, but it also means the two sightings were not randomly scattered across the city. They happened along one connected route. I sometimes wonder whether there were other witnesses. The road was used by people returning from late shifts, bars, and nearby neighborhoods. Someone else may have seen a strange animal and never reported it. Most drivers would assume it was a deer or dog and continue home. Only a person who saw it stand or jump unusually might remember it. Local social media was not as central then as it is now, so sightings could remain isolated. There may have been animal control reports or calls to police that we never heard about. I have also considered how alcohol affects memory. My brother may have had only a brief glimpse of something ordinary. During the 5-minute drive home, fear and intoxication could have reshaped the event. By the time he burst through the door, the animal had become massive. Its eyes were glowing, and the jump covered 25 feet. He may not have consciously lied. Memory can change almost immediately, especially under stress. The story he told us could have been completely honest from his perspective, while still being inaccurate. His visible terror does not prove the creature looked exactly as he described. It proves he believed he had seen something horrifying. The second witness may also have been tired or affected by darkness. Driving home late after work can reduce alertness. If both men encountered deer under similar streetlights, their descriptions could overlap. Red eye shine is common in animals. My coworker may have remembered her brother's story less precisely than he originally told it. After hearing that my brother saw a large figure, she could have connected the two incidents because of one shared detail. Human beings naturally search for patterns. That is a fair explanation. Yet the emotional effect of the story has never faded for me. When I think about it, I sometimes feel tears form in my eyes. It is not sadness in the normal sense. It is a sudden, uncontrollable feeling of dread. The fear seems physical, as though my body reacts before my mind decides what to believe. I picture my brother alone in the car at 3 in the morning. The headlights move across the road and reveal something hunched in the center. He thinks it is a person. Then it rises. Its red eyes focus through the windshield. It waits until the car approaches. Then it clears the school fence in one movement and disappears into the darkness. The elementary school makes the image especially unsettling. During the day, it would have been filled with children, teachers, buses, and parents. At night, the playground and buildings were empty. Whatever my brother saw ran into that familiar place and vanished. I wonder whether it crossed the property, hid behind the school, or continued toward another neighborhood. If it was an animal, it probably wanted to escape the road and found the fence easy to clear. If it was a person, the jump makes no sense unless the distance was badly misjudged. If it was something else, I have no idea why it stood in front of the car at all. It did not chase my brother. It did not strike the vehicle. It only looked at him and left. That makes the encounter feel less like an attack and more like an accidental crossing. Maybe both of them surprised each other. The figure was doing something in the road, heard the car, stood, and escaped. My brother happened to see it clearly enough to be terrified. The glowing eyes could be the simplest clue. Eye sheen is caused when light reflects from a layer behind the retina in many animals. Humans do not normally have it, but deer, dogs, cats, raccoons, and other nocturnal animals do. The color can vary depending on the angle and light source. Red eyes do not require anything supernatural. The fact that the eyes appeared red may actually support the animal explanation. But an animal's eyes usually reflect the headlights. My brother insisted the gaze felt more intentional. He believed it looked past the light and into him. That may have been fear assigning intelligence to a normal stare. Or it may be the most accurate detail he remembered. I have asked myself whether the figure could have been someone wearing reflective lenses, goggles, or a mask. A prankster might crouch in the road, stand when a car approached, and then run toward the school. The red eyes could come from LEDs or reflective material. But the leap over the fence would still need explanation. The person could have gone through an open gate that looked like part of the fence from my brother's moving perspective. At 3 in the morning, with headlights changing the view, he might believe the person cleared the fence when they actually used an entrance. That is possible. A prank would also explain why the figure focused on the driver. Perhaps someone wanted to frighten passing cars. But there were no reports of teenagers or adults doing this, and the second encounter happened 6 miles away. It would require planning or multiple people. Another possibility is that my brother fell asleep briefly at the wheel. Alcohol, fatigue, and late-night driving can cause microsleeps. He may have dreamed the figure during a few seconds of lost awareness, then awakened while still driving. The school fence and road could have entered the dream from his actual surroundings. His panic afterward would be genuine. This is dangerous, but plausible. However, he described the encounter as continuous, and apparently he did not crash or leave the road. A microsleep long enough to produce such a scene might have caused other signs. Still, sleep-related imagery can happen quickly. No explanation is perfect. What remains is a story supported by fear and coincidence, rather than evidence. My brother saw something. My coworker's brother apparently saw something similar. Both accounts happened late at night on the same road within a few days. The matching red eyes connected them. That is all I can honestly say. I do not claim that a supernatural creature was living in suburban Houston. I do not claim my brother's estimate of the jump was exact. I cannot even guarantee that the second witness would describe the encounter the same way if I spoke with him directly today. The story has passed through several people and years of memory, but I was present when my brother came home. I heard the door slam. I heard him running upstairs. I saw his face. Whatever happened on that road had stripped away his usual joking personality. For once, he was not trying to entertain anyone. He wanted to be inside with the door locked. Then, only days later, someone who had never heard his full description asked about the glowing red eyes. That moment changed the story from one person's drunken mistake into something I could never completely dismiss. Maybe two drivers encountered the same large deer. Maybe fatigue and darkness created the same illusion twice. Maybe an escaped animal moved along the road for several nights. Those are reasonable possibilities, and one is probably correct. But when I remember my coworker interrupting me, I still feel that same cold dread. I had barely started describing the figure. Before I reached the part that disturbed my brother most, she looked at me and asked whether its eyes were red. They were. Her brother had seen them too. To this day, I avoid thinking too long about what might stand in the middle of that road after 3 in the morning. I know the suburbs are not empty wilderness. There are houses, schools, fences, traffic lights, and people only a short distance away. But darkness creates spaces between all those familiar things. For a few minutes, a road can belong to something no one expects to find there. My brother approached one of those dark spaces and saw a massive figure rise in front of him. It stared through the windshield. Then it leaped over the school fence and disappeared. Perhaps it was only an animal. I hope it was. But the next time someone saw it, it was 6 miles farther down the same road. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, there was a janitor's closet in my elementary school that connected to the boiler room. The closet was in a part of the building we passed regularly, but students were not supposed to go inside. It was meant for cleaning supplies, tools, and the other equipment used to maintain the school. The boiler room was beyond it. I never knew exactly what was inside that second room. I imagined pipes, furnaces, electrical boxes, and large machines that made the building warm. Even during the day, the area around the closet felt darker and more industrial than the rest of the school. Most of the building was bright and noisy. There were classrooms decorated with colorful paper, hallways covered in student artwork, and teachers constantly moving between rooms. The cafeteria smelled like food, the gym echoed with voices, and the front office always seemed busy. The janitor's closet did not feel like part of that world. Its door was usually shut. The janitor at the time was an older man. I will call him Doug. Doug was kind to the students. He was not the kind of school employee children feared. He smiled, answered questions, and did not become angry when someone accidentally made a mess. Most of us liked him, but there was something strange about the way he handled his supplies. Instead of using the janitor's closet beside the boiler room, he kept many of his cleaning materials in a storage closet near the cafeteria. I noticed because he regularly wheeled his cart from that area, even though the proper closet would have seemed more convenient. The cafeteria closet was also closer to students. Kids moved through that part of the building throughout the day, especially during breakfast and lunch. It did not make much sense to me that cleaning products were stored there while the actual janitor's closet remained mostly unused. One day I asked Doug why he did not like the proper closet. I expected a simple answer. Maybe the room was too small. Perhaps the plumbing leaked, the door did not lock, or the heat from the boiler made it uncomfortable. Instead, Doug told me that he felt uneasy whenever he went inside. He did not give me a dramatic story. He did not say he had seen a ghost. He only said the room made him feel unnerved. That answer immediately caught my attention. At 7 years old, adults seemed to understand buildings better than children did. They knew which doors were safe to open, which machines were dangerous, and which sounds came from pipes or heating systems. If an adult like Doug felt uncomfortable in that room, I assumed there had to be a reason. I began wondering what was behind the door. Maybe there were rats. Maybe the boiler made loud noises. Maybe another janitor had been injured there. The more I thought about it, the more curious I became. Children are often attracted to places they have been told to avoid. A closed door becomes more interesting simply because it is closed. Doug's discomfort made the closet feel like a secret. Eventually, I decided to look inside. I do not remember whether I planned it far in advance or only acted when I saw the area empty. I was alone when I approached the door. The hallway nearby was quiet. No teacher stopped me. Doug was not there. I reached for the handle and opened the closet. At first, I saw what looked like a man standing inside. His back was turned toward me. The room was dim, and I could not see much around him. The figure appeared adult-sized. I assumed it was Doug. That explanation made sense. He may have gone into the room despite telling me he disliked it. Perhaps he was checking a pipe or collecting something he had left behind. I called his name. Doug? The figure turned around. It did not have a normal face. Where the eyes should have been, there were dark, hollow-looking injuries, as though both eyes had been gouged out. The rest of the face looked twisted and damaged. The flesh seemed distorted or partly missing. I could see what looked like blood vessels, muscle, and raw tissue beneath the skin. It was not simply an old man with scars. The face appeared destroyed. The figure looked directly toward me, even though I could not understand how it could see without eyes. I screamed. I do not remember closing the door. I may have stepped backward or run immediately. The image was so shocking that the moments afterward became confused. Other children heard me and asked what was wrong. I tried to explain that there was a man inside the janitor's closet with no proper face. I described the empty eyes and exposed flesh. Nobody believed me. Some students laughed. A few may have looked into the closet afterward and found nothing. There was no injured man standing there. Doug was not inside. No blood covered the floor or walls. The room was only a closet connected to the boiler area. Because I was frightened and the evidence had disappeared, the other children decided I had imagined it. The story spread through the school. For the rest of the year, students called me the boiler room pansy. This was during the late 2000s, when insults like pansy, loser, and emo were common among kids at my school. The nickname was not especially creative, but it embarrassed me. Whenever we passed the janitor's closet, someone would bring it up. They would ask whether the faceless man was still inside. Some pretended to scream. Others accused me of being afraid of a storage room. The experience that had terrified me became a joke. I stopped trying to convince anyone. The more I defended myself, the more they laughed. At that age, being mocked by classmates can change how you remember an event. Part of me began wondering whether I had really seen anything. Maybe the darkness created a shape. Perhaps cleaning equipment hanging from the wall looked like a person. A mop head, torn cloth, hoses, and exposed pipes could have formed something that resembled a damaged face. When I called Doug's name, I may have shifted the door or changed the angle of light, making the shape appear to turn. My fear could have added the rest. A child's imagination can create vivid images from very little information. The closet may also have contained masks, damaged posters, or cleaning materials that looked like skin and veins in poor light. Boiler rooms often have rusted pipes, insulation, wiring, and stained surfaces. A combination of those objects could look horrifying for a second. Once I screamed, my mind may have fixed the image into something more detailed than it really was. That explanation would make sense. I was 7 or 8. I had already been told by Doug that the room felt unsettling. His comment prepared me to expect something frightening. I opened the door with fear and curiosity already in my mind. The first vague shape I saw became the thing I unconsciously expected to find. Even so, I remembered the face clearly. The empty eye sockets, the twisted flesh, the exposed red tissue. The way the figure turned after I called out, those details stayed with me after the teasing stopped. I did not remain at that school for many more years. I left after that single school year. Once I was gone, the janitor's closet and the nickname became part of an old childhood memory. I still thought about Doug occasionally. He had been kind to me, and I wondered whether he continued avoiding the closet. Later, I heard something from a former classmate. The school had changed its policies regarding cleaning supplies. Keeping chemicals in the cafeteria storage area was considered unsafe because students could potentially access them. The new rule required Doug to store and use his supplies in the actual janitor's closet. The same room, he had told me, made him uneasy. I do not know how strongly he objected. Maybe he accepted the change without complaint. He had a job to do, and school policies were not his decision. Perhaps by then the room had been cleaned, repaired, or reorganized. Maybe his original discomfort had been caused by poor ventilation, heat, or noise from the boiler. There was no reason to assume anything supernatural happened when he began using it. Still, hearing that he had been forced back into that space made me remember the figure. I wondered whether Doug had ever seen anything inside. When he told me the room made him uneasy, had he only been describing a feeling? Or had he once opened the door and seen something he did not want to discuss with a child? I never asked him. 6 years passed. By then, I was older and no longer thought about the elementary school often. At some point, I reconnected with a former friend who had known the people and places from that period of my life. I asked what had happened to Doug. I expected to hear that he had retired or moved away. Instead, my former friend told me that Doug had died. He suggested I check the local library, which kept a daily copy of the town newspaper in a large archive dating back to the 1970s. I found the report. Doug had been working in the cafeteria early one morning, around 6 o'clock, before students arrived. He was cleaning the floors when part of a light fixture broke. A piece of metal fell and struck him in the face. One of his eyes was severely injured or gouged out by the metal. According to the article, he suffered a heart attack at the time of the accident and died. Reading the report brought back the image from the janitor's closet immediately. Years before, I had opened the door and seen what appeared to be a man with his back turned. When he faced me, his eyes looked gouged out, and the flesh of his face appeared torn open. Now Doug had died after a piece of metal from a light fixture struck his face and destroyed one eye. The events were not identical. The figure I remembered had damage to both eyes and much more severe facial distortion. Doug's accident involved one eye, and the newspaper said the heart attack was the actual cause of death. He also died in the cafeteria, not inside the janitor's closet or boiler room. I do not want to change those facts to make the story more dramatic, but the similarity was enough to make me feel sick. I began wondering whether the figure I had seen as a child was some kind of warning. Maybe it showed Doug's future injury years before it happened. Perhaps the man in the closet had not been a stranger or ghost. Maybe it had been an image of what would eventually happen to him. That explanation raises more questions than it answers. Why would I be shown the injury? Why would the figure appear in the closet Doug avoided if the accident later happened in the cafeteria? Why were both eyes damaged in the vision when the real accident affected only one? If the purpose was to warn someone, I had no useful information to give. I was a child who could only describe a faceless man in a dark room. Nobody believed me, and even if they had, there was no way to connect the image to a light fixture 6 years in the future. The link may exist only in my mind. Accidents involving facial injuries are disturbing but not supernatural. I may have remembered the childhood figure more vividly after learning how Doug died. The newspaper report could have changed the image in my memory. Perhaps the figure originally had only a strange or shadowed face. After reading about the damaged eye, my mind may have strengthened the details of gouged sockets and torn flesh. Memory is not a fixed recording. Every time we recall something, we can unintentionally alter it. The more meaningful a later event seems, the more likely we are to reshape an earlier memory to match. That is a reasonable explanation. I cannot produce a written account from when I was 7 proving exactly what I described. The classmates who teased me may remember only that I said I saw a monster or a man in the boiler room. They probably do not remember the exact facial injuries. If I had drawn the figure or written down the details before Doug's death, the similarity would be more significant. I did not. All I have is my memory. Still, I know the central part of the story existed before the accident. The children called me the boiler room pansy because I screamed after seeing something inside. I told them the figure had a destroyed face. The teasing happened years before Doug died. That cannot have been created afterward. The exact degree of damage may be uncertain, but the image was always connected to missing eyes and exposed flesh. I also think about Doug's original statement. He felt unnerved in the room. Most people experience discomfort in certain places without any paranormal cause. Boiler rooms are hot, noisy, cramped, and poorly lit. Pipes click and bang. Air pressure changes. Machines start unexpectedly. A person working alone in such a space might naturally feel watched or unsafe. Doug may have disliked it because of the environment. He might also have had a bad experience there, such as a fall, electrical shock, or mechanical failure. He did not need to believe in ghosts. His comment may have been completely practical. But if the room contained only ordinary equipment, why did he avoid using the proper closet for so long? Moving supplies to the cafeteria was inconvenient and apparently violated later safety rules. His discomfort must have been strong enough that he preferred an unsuitable location. Maybe the closet had poor ventilation and cleaning chemicals made him sick. Perhaps the heat damaged the supplies. There could have been mold, asbestos, pests, or a leaking pipe. Any of those reasons would explain his behavior. He may not have wanted to frighten a child with the full explanation, so he simply said the room made him uneasy. The figure I saw could have been an intruder. Schools have many employees, contractors, and maintenance workers. A man may have been working in the boiler room when I opened the door. He could have worn protective goggles, a mask, or damaged equipment that made his face look strange. If he turned suddenly in the darkness, I may have misinterpreted what I saw. But no adult came out after I screamed. Nobody explained that a worker had been inside. A real person with a severe facial injury would not likely hide in a school closet without anyone knowing. The figure may have been Doug himself. Perhaps he was inside, turned toward me, and shadows distorted his face. I called his name because I already assumed the person was him. If the light came from behind or below, his eyes might appear dark and his features uneven. A hanging object between us could have made it seem as though part of his face was missing. After I screamed and ran, Doug may have left by another door connected to the boiler room. Maybe he never understood what frightened me. But I remember seeing him elsewhere later, and he appeared normal. I never asked whether he had been inside at the time. The face could also have been a sleep-like or stress-related hallucination, even though I was awake. Children sometimes experience brief visual distortions, especially in dim environments. A human-shaped object can seem to move. Fear can create the sensation of facial features where none exist. The figure did not chase me, speak, or leave physical evidence. The sighting lasted only seconds. That makes a perceptual mistake far more likely than a supernatural event. Yet it did not feel vague. The figure turned. Its ruined face was directed at me. I reacted before I had time to invent a story. Years later, the newspaper report gave that old fear a new meaning. I felt guilty for wondering whether the image had predicted Doug's death. A real person had died in a workplace accident. He was not a character in a ghost story. He had been a kind older man who cleaned our school and treated children well. Reducing his death to a creepy coincidence felt disrespectful. At the same time, I could not stop seeing the figure, the damaged eye, the exposed tissue, the still body in the janitor's closet. I wondered whether Doug's own unease had been connected to his death in some symbolic way. The school forced him to use the closet, but he later died in the cafeteria, the place where he had originally preferred to keep his supplies. There is an unsettling reversal in that. He avoided the janitor's closet and stored everything in the cafeteria. The policy pushed him back toward the closet. Then, years later, while working in the cafeteria, a fixture above him failed. Perhaps the location had no deeper meaning. He could have been injured anywhere. The equipment broke because of age, poor maintenance, or bad luck. The heart attack may have resulted from the shock and trauma. That is enough to explain the tragedy. The human mind does not like meaningless accidents. We search backward for warnings. A strange childhood sighting becomes an omen. A person's discomfort becomes intuition. Two unrelated details become a pattern. Maybe that is what I have done. I saw something frightening in a closet. Years later, Doug suffered a facial injury and died. Because both events involved him, the school, and damaged eyes, I connected them. If the newspaper had reported a different cause of death, the childhood vision might have remained only a strange memory. The later accident gave it power. There is also the possibility that my former friend or the newspaper story contained details that became exaggerated during retelling. Local reports sometimes simplify medical information. A piece of a light fixture may have struck near the eye rather than fully gouging it out. The phrase may have come from the way other people described the accident, not the official article. I remember enough to know the injury involved one eye and a heart attack, but I cannot guarantee every detail remained exact. I do not want to claim more certainty than I have. What I know is that Doug was found dead in the cafeteria after part of a light fixture broke while he was cleaning. The accident badly injured one eye. The newspaper attributed his death to a heart attack at the time of the incident. What I remember from childhood is a man-shaped figure turning toward me with ruined eyes and a distorted face. Those two memories remain linked. I sometimes wonder whether Doug ever went into the closet alone after the policy changed. Did he still feel uneasy? Did he see anything? Did the feeling fade once he used the room regularly? Maybe he eventually discovered a normal reason for the discomfort. A faulty fan, a vibration in the floor, carbon monoxide, heat, a specific sound from the boiler that made his nervous system react. If so, I wish I had known. A simple explanation might have changed the way I remembered the place. Instead, Doug's death prevented me from ever asking. I also wonder whether any later students saw something in the room. Schools collect stories quickly. A strange noise becomes a ghost. A locked basement becomes the location of an old death. Students scare one another with rumors until nobody knows which parts were true. Perhaps the boiler room pansy story continued after I left. Maybe children dared one another to open the door. If someone else saw a figure, I never heard about it. The lack of other sightings supports the idea that mine was a one-time mistake. A haunted room should produce more than one frightened child. But maybe other students stayed away because the closet was locked, or because Doug's supplies eventually filled it. There may have been no opportunity for another encounter. I still feel sympathy for the child I was. I opened a door because I was curious. Then I saw something that looked like a mutilated person. Instead of receiving reassurance, I was laughed at for the rest of the year. The nickname taught me to remain quiet about strange experiences. It also made me doubt my own perception. That doubt may be healthy. Not every frightening memory is supernatural. But ridicule is not the same as explanation. The other children did not prove that nothing was there. They only decided that believing me was less entertaining than mocking me. Doug was one of the few adults associated with the closet who had admitted feeling something unusual. He never told me I was being foolish. He said he felt unnerved there too. That small statement mattered more after his death. Maybe we were both reacting to the same physical environment. A low-frequency vibration from machinery can cause anxiety, discomfort, and even visual disturbances. Poor air quality can produce headaches or confusion. Flickering lights and shadows can distort perception. Boiler rooms and old utility spaces are full of conditions that can make people feel watched. If there was a mechanical problem in that area, Doug's unease and my vision could share a normal cause. The figure may have been a visual illusion created by dim light, equipment, and fear. That explanation is more believable than a prediction of a future accident. It is also impossible to test now. The school may have been renovated. The boiler, lights, and closet could be completely different. Doug is gone. I have not returned to stand in that doorway again. Part of me does not want to. Even if the room now looks ordinary, I know what my mind would place inside it. A man standing with his back turned, his shoulders slightly hunched, a silence before he moves. Then, the slow turn. No eyes, a face open beneath the skin. I would rather remember the door closed. The detail that troubles me most is not the blood or exposed muscle. It is the fact that I called Doug's name. I saw an adult figure in a room connected to his work, and my first assumption was that it was him. The figure responded by turning. Years later, when I learned how Doug died, it felt as though the thing had answered me honestly, not by showing me who it was in that moment, but by showing me what would eventually happen to the man whose name I called. That may be nothing more than the way memory creates meaning. The figure might never have looked like Doug. The injury might not match as closely as it feels. 6 years is a long time between two unrelated events. Coincidences can be disturbing without being supernatural. I understand that. Still, I cannot completely separate them. Doug avoided the closet because it made him uneasy. I entered it once and saw a faceless man with ruined eyes. 6 years later, Doug died at the same school after a piece of metal struck his face and destroyed one eye. The newspaper called it a heart attack caused at the time of the injury. No article mentioned the closet. No one remembered the frightened child who had screamed there years earlier. To everyone else, Doug's death was a tragic workplace accident. That is probably all it was. But whenever I think about him, I do not first picture the cafeteria or the newspaper archive. I picture the janitor's closet. The door opens. A man stands in the darkness with his back to me. I call Doug's name. Then the figure slowly turns around. When I was younger, I spent the night at a friend's house. and we decided it would be fun to sleep in a tent in her backyard. At that age, camping outside felt like an adventure, even if we were only a short distance from the house. We were not deep in the wilderness or far from help. If anything went wrong, we could unzip the tent, cross the yard, and go inside. That was what made the idea seem safe. My friend lived in the countryside, and her family had a very large backyard. During the day, it was an open, familiar space where we could run around without worrying about traffic or neighbors watching us. Beyond the more maintained part of the property, the land became darker and less clearly separated from the surrounding fields, trees, and rural areas. At night, the same yard felt much larger. There were no streetlights nearby to illuminate every corner. Once the lights inside the house were switched off, most of the property disappeared into darkness. We placed the tent far enough from the house to feel as though we were really camping, but not so far that our parents would consider it unsafe. We brought out sleeping bags, pillows, snacks, and whatever else we thought we needed. We probably talked for a long time after getting inside, laughing about things that seemed important to us then. Nothing frightening happened while we were awake together. Eventually, my friend fell asleep. I have always been a light sleeper. I often wake in the middle of the night for no obvious reason, even when there is no sound or movement around me. That night, I woke sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning. Neither of us owned a cell phone at the time, so I could not check the hour. I only knew it was very late because the house was dark and the night felt completely still. My friend was asleep beside me. I lay inside my sleeping bag, trying to get comfortable and fall asleep again. The interior of the tent was almost black, but not completely. A small amount of light from the sky or distant house windows passed through the fabric, making the walls faintly visible. I could see the shape of my friend beside me and the outlines of our bags. Outside, the countryside made its usual night sounds. Insects moved through the grass, leaves shifted in the breeze, animals called from far away. When you live in or visit a rural area, you quickly learn that darkness is never truly silent. There are always things moving where you cannot see them. At first, those sounds did not bother me. Then, I heard something scratching the tent. It was quiet, but close. The sound came from one of the fabric walls only a short distance from where we were lying. Scratch, a pause. Then another slow drag across the material. My first thought was that one of my friend's cats had come outside. Her family owned cats, and it seemed completely possible that one of them was wandering through the yard at night. A cat might smell us inside, recognize our voices or scent, and paw at the tent to investigate. That explanation was comforting. I kept my eyes closed for a moment, expecting the animal to lose interest and move away. Instead, the scratching continued. It did not sound like quick, playful pawing. The movement was slow. Something dragged across the side of the tent with what sounded like nails or claws. Then it stopped. I opened my eyes. There was a shadow on the outside of the fabric. It was much larger than a cat. There was not enough light for me to see a clear outline. The tent wall only showed a dark mass positioned close to it, but the size immediately frightened me. Whatever was outside appeared large enough that it could have been a human crouching beside the tent. I stared at the shadow, trying to decide whether the shape came from an animal standing very close to the fabric. A large dog might appear huge when its body blocked the faint light outside. A deer could lower its head near the tent. Even a small animal could cast an exaggerated shadow, depending on the position of the moon or house lights. But the movement did not feel random. The scratching happened again. This time, I listened carefully. It sounded like several nails slowly moving over the tent fabric. The pressure was light enough that the material did not tear. but firm enough for me to hear every movement. The sound traveled a short distance, stopped, and then began again. I was suddenly too frightened to move. My friend remained asleep beside me. I wanted to wake her. All I needed to do was reach over, shake her shoulder, and whisper that something was outside. But I was afraid that any movement would let it know we were awake. It already knew we were inside. That was obvious. Still, there was a difference between something investigating a quiet tent and something realizing two frightened children were listening. I believed that if I remained completely still, it might lose interest and leave. So I did not call my friend's name. I did not reach for her. I barely allowed myself to breathe. The scratching stopped. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then I heard movement along the side of the tent. Something shifted through the grass. The shadow moved away from its original position. A sliding sound followed as part of its body, hand, or claws brushed along the fabric. It moved to another section of the tent. Then the scratching began again. Slow, steady, purposeful. That was what disturbed me most. It did not sound like an animal trying to enter. It was not digging under the tent or tearing at one spot. It moved from place to place, scratched for a while, then moved again. It felt as though whatever was outside was circling us. The sound traveled around the tent, sometimes near my head and sometimes closer to our feet. Each time it moved, the fabric shifted slightly. I could hear grass being pressed down. I could not tell whether the movement came from 4 legs, 2 legs, or something crawling low to the ground. There were no clear footsteps, only the scratching, sliding, and occasional rustling. I kept staring at the tent wall. Sometimes the shadow disappeared completely. That did not make me feel safer. It meant I no longer knew where the thing was. I would lie there waiting, wondering whether it had left. Then the scratching would begin on another side, closer than before. The whole experience may have lasted 15 minutes. It may have lasted 30. Without a clock, it was impossible to know. Fear made every minute feel much longer. I remember thinking that it had been going on forever. My body became uncomfortable from remaining so still. My breathing felt too loud. My heart was pounding hard enough that I worried the thing outside could hear it through the fabric. I held my mouth closed and tried to take shallow breaths through my nose. My friend did not wake. I could hear her breathing normally beside me. At one point, I considered covering her mouth before waking her so she would not scream. But that would require moving across the tent, and I could not make myself do it. I also did not know how she would react. If she woke suddenly and saw me leaning over her in the darkness, she might panic before understanding what was happening. Then whatever was outside would know exactly where we were. So I remained frozen. The scratching continued. Sometimes it came in short movements. Other times, something dragged slowly along the wall for several seconds. The noise made me imagine fingernails pressing into the material from outside. A person could have crouched beside the tent and moved one hand across it while listening to us breathe. The thought of a human being out there was worse than the thought of an animal. An animal might be curious, hungry, or territorial. A person would understand that 2 young girls were sleeping inside. If they chose to remain there, moving around the tent and scratching it deliberately, then frightening us might be the entire purpose. I wondered whether someone had followed me to my friend's house. Maybe a neighbor or older teenager had seen us setting up the tent and decided to scare us. In the countryside, houses could be far apart, but people still knew what their neighbors were doing. Someone might have watched from the road or another property. They could have waited until the house went dark before entering the yard. A prank seemed possible, but the idea did not comfort me. A person willing to spend half an hour crouching outside a children's tent in the middle of the night was not harmless, even if they claimed it was only a joke. I waited for a voice. I expected someone to whisper our names, laugh, or suddenly hit the tent. No one spoke. The silence outside the scratching made the behavior harder to understand. If it was a person, they were making an effort not to reveal themselves. If it was an animal, it was moving with a patience I had never heard before. At times, the scratching became so light that I almost convinced myself it was a branch. A branch rubbing against tent fabric in the wind could make a slow, dragging sound. But we had set the tent in an open area. I did not remember any branches touching it when we went to sleep. A branch would also repeat the same movement from one position. This sound moved around us. It stopped on one wall and began on another. The wind could not carry a branch around the entire tent. A cat still seemed possible. Cats sometimes stretch against surfaces and drag their claws. One might walk around the tent, scratching at different places because it heard movement inside. But the shadow looked too large. The sounds were too slow. I also expected a cat to meow, purr, or move more lightly through the grass. The creature outside seemed heavier. A large dog could fit the size better. Dogs often scratch at doors when they want to enter. A dog might smell people inside and paw at the tent. If it circled us, its body could brush against the fabric, producing the sliding sound. But I did not hear panting, sniffing, a collar, or the quick clicking of claws on harder ground. It never barked. If my friend's family owned a dog, I did not recognize the behavior as one of their animals. A wild animal was another possibility. The countryside had many creatures I rarely encountered at home. A fox, badger, raccoon, or some larger animal might investigate the tent. It could smell food inside. We may have left snack wrappers near our sleeping bags. From the animal's perspective, the tent was only an unfamiliar object containing interesting smells. The scratching might have been an attempt to locate an opening. That explanation makes sense now. At the time, I did not know enough about animal behavior to reassure myself. Every sound became more human. I pictured a crouched figure moving on its hands and feet, dragging its nails along the fabric while it circled us. I tried to look toward the entrance. The zipper was closed. If something tried to open it, I would have nowhere to go. The tent was meant to protect us from insects and weather, not from a determined person or large animal. The thin fabric could be cut or torn easily. We were only a short run from the house, but reaching it meant unzipping the entrance and stepping outside. I could not do that without knowing which side the creature was on. I imagined opening the flap and finding a face waiting inches away, so I stayed inside. The noises from farther across the countryside became much more frightening as the night continued. An animal screeched somewhere in the distance. Another answered from a different direction. Something snarled or called from beyond the yard. Normally, I might have ignored those sounds. That night, each one seemed connected to whatever was outside the tent. I began imagining more than one creature moving around the property. The rural darkness felt full of eyes. The scratching stopped again. I waited. A minute passed. Then, another. I did not believe it was gone. The silence felt like part of the same behavior. Maybe it had crouched near the entrance. Perhaps it was listening for movement. I kept my eyes on the fabric, searching for the shadow. Nothing appeared. Eventually, I heard another slow scrape near the back of the tent. The sound moved along the wall and stopped beside my head. I could feel the fabric shift slightly. I pressed myself deeper into the sleeping bag. I wanted to cry, but I was afraid even quiet sobbing would reveal that I was awake. I remember thinking that whatever was outside knew I was listening. The pattern felt too controlled to be accidental. Scratch, pause, move, scratch again. It was as though it wanted to frighten us without entering. That idea stayed with me long after the night ended. If the thing wanted food, why did it not tear the tent? If it wanted to attack, why did it not force its way inside? If it was only curious, why did it continue for so long? The behavior seemed designed to keep me awake and afraid. Of course, that may have been my human interpretation. Animals do not always act with a purpose we understand. A creature may investigate the same object repeatedly because of smell, sound, or texture. The slow scratching could have been completely ordinary to it. But from inside the tent, it felt deliberate. At some point, the scratching finally stopped. I do not remember a clear moment when the creature left. There was no sudden run across the grass, no final sound moving away. The noises simply became less frequent until the silence remained. I continued lying still. I waited for the scratching to begin again. I did not trust the quiet. My friend slept through everything. I considered waking her once the sounds had stopped, but I was afraid speaking would bring them back. I also worried she would not believe me and might open the tent to look. The last thing I wanted was for either of us to go outside. So I stayed awake until morning. The countryside continued making noises. Birds or animals cried out in the distance. Leaves moved. Something rustled near the edge of the yard. Every sound caused a new rush of fear. I watched the darkness inside the tent slowly become gray as dawn approached. Only when daylight began filtering through the fabric did I feel able to breathe normally again. The tent walls became visible. The shadows outside lost their power. I could hear morning birds replacing the night sounds. My friend eventually woke and acted as though she had slept normally. I told her what happened. I do not remember whether she believed me completely. She may have suggested one of the cats had been outside. That was the easiest explanation, and there was no evidence proving otherwise. We may have checked the tent for scratches or damage. I do not remember finding anything obvious. The fabric had not been torn. There were no holes. If claws or nails touched it, they did so lightly enough to leave no clear mark. We may also have looked at the ground, but grass does not preserve tracks well, especially when children do not know what to look for. There was no person hiding nearby in daylight. No animal remained beside the tent. The yard looked completely safe again. That normal appearance made the night feel almost unreal. It is easy to doubt something after sunrise. A sound that seemed threatening in the darkness becomes a branch, cat, or wind once the world is visible. Maybe one of her cats really did spend the night circling us. The shadow could have looked enormous because the animal was pressed close to the fabric. A cat's claws dragging over nylon might sound much slower and heavier from the inside. It may have moved from one location to another because it heard our breathing or smelled food. The sliding sound could have been its fur rubbing against the tent. A cat is probably the simplest explanation. But even now, I struggle to match the size of the shadow with a cat. It seemed high and broad, as though something much larger was crouching beside us. A dog might fit better. A stray dog could enter a rural yard quietly and investigate the tent for food. If it remained low to the ground, its shadow might resemble a human shape. The scratching could come from one front paw. The animal may have circled because it was uncertain how to approach. Still, I never heard breathing or sniffing. A person playing a prank cannot be ruled out either. Someone may have known we were sleeping outside. They could have used a hand, stick, or other object to scrape the fabric while moving around the tent. The lack of speech might have been intentional. They may have wanted us to imagine something worse than a person. If so, they succeeded. But no one ever confessed. My friend did not mention an older sibling, neighbor, or local teenager admitting to it later. A prank that effective would usually become a story the person wanted credit for. Instead, nothing explained it. Years later, I learned how many animals make frightening noises at night. Foxes can sound like screaming women. Owls can produce calls that seem almost unnatural. Raccoons growl, chatter, and manipulate objects with their paws. Deer can move quietly despite their size. Badgers, opossums, and other animals may approach tents for food. Any one of them could have created the experience. The most likely answer is that a wild or domestic animal investigated our tent and eventually wandered away. That is what I tell myself. But the memory remains tied to the rhythm of the scratching. It did not feel like random movement. It felt patient. The thing moved to one part of the tent, slowly dragged across it, waited, and then relocated. The fact that it continued for so long made the experience seem intentional. 15 minutes is a long time to remain frozen. 30 minutes is even longer. By the end, every muscle in my body hurt from the effort of staying still. I had spent the entire time thinking I might need to run, yet I was too frightened to move. That helplessness stayed with me. After the sleepover, I avoided sleeping in tents for a long time. When friends suggested camping, I remembered the shadow outside the fabric. Even as I got older and understood that an animal was the most reasonable explanation, I could not relax fully in a tent. The material is too thin. You can hear everything outside, but see almost nothing. A branch brushing the fabric feels like a hand. An animal sniffing near the entrance feels like someone breathing. Every shadow appears larger because it is only inches away. A tent gives the illusion of being indoors without providing the safety of walls. I still become nervous when camping. Before going to sleep, I check the area around the tent. I make sure food is stored properly and nothing is touching the fabric. I listen to every movement outside. If something brushes the wall, I am instantly awake. Part of me returns to that backyard, lying beside my sleeping friend while something moves around us. I know there are many normal explanations. A cat, a dog, a wild animal, a branch dragged by wind, possibly even another child trying to scare us. I cannot honestly claim it was anything supernatural. I never saw a face. I never saw a full body. The shadow was too unclear to identify. All I experienced were sounds, movement, and the impression of something large crouching outside. But not knowing what it was has kept the memory alive. If I had opened the tent and seen a cat, I would have been frightened for a few seconds and then laughed. If someone admitted to the prank, I would have been angry, but the mystery would be gone. Instead, I remained inside until daylight and never learned what had circled us. The sound is still clear in my memory. Slow nails dragging across the fabric. A pause. Grass shifting. The pressure moving to another side. Then another long scratch. It did not try to enter. It did not speak. It only moved around us, again and again, while my friend slept, and I pretended not to be awake. Maybe it was never trying to frighten us. Maybe it was only an animal searching for food. But inside that tent, in the middle of the countryside, with no phone and no way to see outside, it felt as though something knew exactly what it was doing. I did not sleep again that night. And for years afterward, whenever I saw a tent in the dark, I imagined a human-sized shadow crouching beside it, slowly dragging its nails along the wall. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. When I was very young, probably 6 or 7 years old, my bedroom had a layout that made one part of the room feel especially dark at night. My bed was pushed into a corner beneath the window on the second floor. On the other side of the room stood a huge armoire, a thick, heavy piece of furniture that was much taller than I was. Across from it was my desk with a computer, and against the wall to the left sat a hollow white bench where I stored toys. The bench was directly beneath my television and just to the right of the bedroom door. During the day, there was nothing frightening about any of it. The room was familiar. The bench was where I kept stuffed animals, dolls, and whatever other toys I had at the time. The armoire was only a large dresser. The computer desk and television were ordinary parts of my bedroom. At night, though, the furniture created deep shapes and narrow spaces where the light did not reach properly. I was already afraid of the dark. I did not like being unable to see the corners of the room, and I often kept the television on while I slept. The changing glow from the screen made shadows move across the walls, but even that felt safer than complete darkness. One night, I woke up for no obvious reason. I do not remember having a nightmare before opening my eyes. I did not hear a crash, a voice, or footsteps. I simply became awake. The room was dark enough that I could only make out the larger objects around me. For a moment, I stayed still beneath the covers and tried to understand why I had woken. Then I turned my head toward the bench. Someone was sitting on it. The bench itself was white, so the shape stood out clearly. Less than 10 feet away, a dark figure seemed to be sitting upright on the seat. It was roughly human-sized. I could see what looked like a head, shoulders, a back, and a body positioned as though someone had quietly entered my room and sat down while I was sleeping. The figure was not lying across the bench or piled there randomly. It looked seated. At first, it seemed to be facing away from me. I could not make out a face. There were no visible eyes, clothing, or skin. It was mostly a dark shape against the pale bench, but the outline was clear enough that my mind immediately recognized the person. I became so frightened that I could not even cry. My whole body tightened. I wanted to call for my mother, but I was afraid the figure would hear me. I thought that as long as it believed I was asleep, it might leave me alone. The distance between the bed and the bench suddenly felt incredibly small. The room was not large. If the figure stood up, it could reach me within a few steps. I watched it without moving. It did not make any sound. There was no breathing, clothing shifting, or weight creaking against the bench. It simply sat there. Because it appeared to be looking away, I decided to move. I wanted to get farther from the edge of the bed and closer to the armoire. The armoire stood near the upper end of the mattress, and there was a small space behind it where the furniture met the corner. I thought that if I could reach that area, I might hide. Very slowly, I began sliding upward along the bed. I tried not to make the mattress move. I kept my eyes on the dark shape. Then it turned toward me. I swear the head moved. The figure's attention shifted in my direction the moment I changed position. I froze. Even without seeing a face, I knew it was looking at me. It felt completely aware. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I was too frightened to breathe normally. Then the figure turned away again. I did not know what that meant. Maybe it had not truly noticed me. Perhaps I had imagined the movement because the light from the television changed. The screen could have brightened or darkened, altering the shape of the toys on the bench. But at 6 or 7 years old, I did not think about changing light or visual perception. I thought someone was inside my bedroom. I started moving again. I slid farther toward the top of the bed, trying to reach the narrow space beside the armoire. Again, the figure seemed to turn toward me. I stopped immediately. It stopped too. The experience felt like a game in which the figure allowed me to move only when it looked away. I waited. Eventually, it turned its head back. I continued climbing up the mattress. Each small movement felt dangerous. The blankets shifted beneath my knees. The bed creaked slightly. I expected the figure to stand at any moment. I imagined it crossing the room and grabbing my ankle before I reached the corner. I do not remember seeing arms or hands clearly, but I could picture them reaching from the darkness. Somehow, I made it to the top of the bed. I squeezed myself behind the armoire into the small corner where I believed the figure would have difficulty seeing me. I pulled my knees against my chest and curled into the tightest shape I could. I began crying. I was still trying to remain quiet, but the fear had become too much. I pressed myself against the wall and furniture. The armoire blocked part of my view of the bench, which was both comforting and terrifying. I no longer had to see the figure. But I also could not tell whether it had moved. I listened for footsteps. Nothing came. The room remained quiet. I imagined the figure standing from the bench. I imagined it walking slowly toward the bed and noticing I was no longer beneath the covers. Maybe it would search around the room. Perhaps it would look behind the armoire and find me curled there. I do not know how long I remained awake. At some point, despite the fear, I must have fallen asleep. I have no memory of becoming tired or relaxing. One moment I was hiding, staring toward the room through tears. The next thing I remember is my mother waking me. She had found me curled in the corner behind the armoire. I was still pressed against the wall with my knees pulled up. There was urine beneath me. At some point during the night, I had wet myself from fear. My mother was confused and probably worried. I had not gone to sleep in that corner. She wanted to know why I was hiding there. When I fully woke and saw her, I immediately began crying again. The memory of the figure returned all at once. I told her someone had been sitting on the white bench. I explained that it looked at me whenever I moved. I tried to describe how I had climbed toward the armoire and hidden because I thought it was watching me. My mother told me I had probably seen the toys on the bench. That was the simplest explanation. In the darkness, a pile of stuffed animals and dolls could easily look like a person. Children often wake confused and turn familiar objects into frightening shapes. But when we looked at the bench, there was very little on it. A couple of stuffed animals sat there, along with a Barbie. They were not stacked together in a large pile. They did not reach the height of a seated adult or even an older child. They were not arranged in a way that should have created a clear head, shoulders, and body. The bench was mostly empty. That made the experience harder for me to dismiss. If there had been a large pile of clothing or toys, I might have understood how the mistake happened. A coat over a stuffed animal could resemble someone sitting. A blanket might create shoulders, but the few toys on the bench were small and spread out. Nothing looked like the dark figure I remembered. My mother still believed I had been frightened by shadows. From an adult perspective, that was reasonable. I was young, already afraid of the dark, and had awakened in the middle of the night. The television may have been on, producing changing light. My eyes were not fully adjusted. I could have seen the toys, the bench, and their shadows merge into a human shape. Once I became afraid, every change in the television picture might have made the figure seem to turn. That explanation fits many parts of the experience. When a television scene becomes brighter on one side, shadows can shift. A shape that seems to face away may suddenly look as though it has a profile. If the picture changes again, the shadow appears to turn back. I may have moved at the same time those changes happened and believed the figure was reacting to me. Fear would reinforce that belief. The more I expected it to watch me, the more every small visual change looked intentional. There is also the possibility that I had experienced a waking dream. Children can partially wake while the brain is still producing dream images. These hallucinations can appear inside the real bedroom and remain for seconds or even minutes. A person may see a figure sitting in a chair, standing in the doorway, or watching from a corner. The image can look completely solid. It may seem to move when the person moves. Because the room itself is real, the experience feels different from an ordinary dream. I could have been awake enough to crawl along the bed, but still partly dreaming. That would explain why the figure looked human, even though there was nothing large on the bench. The dream image may have disappeared by the time I fell asleep behind the armoire. I have considered sleep paralysis as well, although I was able to move. During sleep paralysis, people often wake and see dark human shapes nearby. They may feel watched or threatened and be unable to speak. I was initially frozen with fear, but eventually I moved across the bed and hid. That makes typical sleep paralysis less likely. A related sleep hallucination still seems possible. The figure may never have existed outside my mind, but the fear was completely real. The fact that I moved from the bed and remained hidden long enough to fall asleep shows how convinced I was. This was not a quick moment where I mistook a jacket for a person and then realized the truth. I watched it. I tested whether it was aware of me. I moved. It looked. I froze. It looked away. Then I moved again. That sequence repeated enough for me to believe I needed to escape. The detail of the head turning is the part that has stayed with me most strongly. If the shape had remained still, I could accept that it was only toys. But it seemed to react. The timing felt exact. Each time I slid higher on the mattress, it turned toward me. Whenever I stopped, it eventually faced away again. Maybe the movement came from my own eyes. When staring at a dark shape, vision can distort. Peripheral objects seem to shift. The brain tries to create details that are not there. Small, involuntary eye movements can make a stationary image appear to move. Children do not know this. To me, movement meant life. If the figure turned, it had to be watching. I do not remember hearing the door open before waking. The figure could not have entered through the window because my room was on the second floor. A real person would have needed to walk through the house, enter my room, and sit on the bench without waking anyone. That seems unlikely. They also would have needed to leave before morning. My mother found no stranger in the room. Nothing had been stolen or disturbed. There were no signs of an intruder. The human explanation does not make sense unless the person was a family member. Maybe my mother or father entered to check on me and sat briefly on the bench. If I woke and saw them in shadow, I might have panicked before recognizing them. But they would have responded when I cried or moved. They would not have allowed me to crawl behind the armoire and remain there all night. No one admitted sitting in the room. It is possible that the figure never looked as clear as my memory now suggests. I was very young, and the event happened years ago. Memory can become sharper and more organized over time. The original shape may have been vague. The turning may have been only a flicker of shadow. As I repeated the story, the figure might have become more human and the movements more deliberate. That is how memory works sometimes. But the way my mother found me is not something I created later. I truly left the bed. I truly curled up behind the armoire. I truly wet myself. Something frightened me enough to remain there until morning. Even if the figure was imaginary, my reaction shows how real it appeared in the moment. After that night, My fear of darkness became much worse. Before, I had been nervous when the room was completely black. Afterward, I believed darkness could hide someone sitting only a few feet away. I needed the television on while I slept. The sound and light made the room feel occupied in a safe way. As long as I could see the white bench clearly, I knew nobody was sitting there. I would probably check it repeatedly before closing my eyes. If a toy seemed positioned strangely, I moved it. I did not want any silhouette on the seat. The armoire also changed meaning for me. It had been my hiding place, but it was also where my mother found me. Whenever I looked at the narrow space behind it, I remembered being curled there, crying and waiting for something to cross the room. I may have felt safer near the furniture than on the open bed for a while. That fear continued for years. I could not sleep in complete darkness until I was around 12. By then, my father finally forced me to turn the television off at night. He probably believed I was old enough to outgrow the habit and that sleeping with the TV on was unhealthy. He may not have understood that the light had become more than a childhood preference. It was protection. The moment the screen went dark, the white bench returned to shadow. I expected the figure to appear again. Eventually, I learned to sleep without the television. Nothing came back. No dark person sat on the bench. I did not wake behind the armoire again. The absence of repeated experiences supports the idea that it was a dream, hallucination, or one-time visual mistake. If there had truly been something in the room, there is no obvious reason it would appear only once. Still, a single frightening experience can shape habits for years. The mind does not need repeated proof. Once you believe something watched you from the darkness, every dark room carries the possibility that it could happen again. As an adult, I can reconstruct the scene more rationally. A young child wakes suddenly. The room is dim. A few toys sit on a white bench beneath the television. The light changes. The toys cast a larger shadow against the wall or seat. The child sees a person. Fear causes visual distortion. The shadow seems to move. The child crawls to the far corner, cries, wets themselves, and eventually falls asleep. That sequence is completely plausible. It may be exactly what happened. But when I remember it from inside the experience, it does not feel like a shadow. It feels like a presence. The figure had a posture. It sat with intention. It knew where I was. It seemed to wait for me to move. I sometimes wonder whether its face was visible at all. I remember the certainty of being watched more than specific features. The figure may have had no face in my perception, only a darker area where one should have been. That would fit a shadow. But the absence of a visible face made it more frightening. I could not tell who it was. I could not read its expression. I did not know whether it was smiling, angry, or empty. All I understood was attention. There is something deeply frightening about being a child in your own bedroom and realizing you are not alone. The room is supposed to be the safest place in the house. Your parents are nearby. The window is on the second floor. The door is closed or quiet. Nothing should be able to sit down across from you without explanation. Yet that night, something appeared to have done exactly that. The figure did not attack me. It did not speak. It did not stand. It only watched. In some ways, that was worse. If it had moved quickly, I might have screamed and woken the house. If it had spoken, I might have recognized the voice. Instead, it remained calm while I became more terrified. It seemed certain I could not escape the room without crossing its path. I chose the only route that allowed me to move away from it. Up the bed, behind the armoire, into the corner. I do not know whether the thing was still sitting there when I finally fell asleep. I could not see it from my hiding place. Maybe the shadow disappeared as soon as I changed angles. Perhaps I remained terrified because I never looked back. My imagination continued the threat after the visual mistake ended. By morning, the room was bright, and the bench held only stuffed animals and a Barbie. No dark figure, no disturbed objects, no proof. That is the image my mother wanted me to accept. A white bench with a few toys, nothing more. I understand why she believed that. She did not see what I saw. She saw only a frightened child in an unusual place. From her perspective, imagination was the obvious cause. But I remember the distance between the bed and the bench, less than 10 feet. Close enough that I did not need to strain to see the shape. I remember the contrast between the dark body and the white seat. I remember sliding upward. I remember the head turning. Most of all, I remember the feeling that the figure was allowing me to move only when it looked away. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe the television created moving shadows. Maybe my fear of darkness turned a Barbie and 2 stuffed animals into a seated person. Those explanations are far more likely than anything supernatural. Still, they do not fully remove the memory. For years afterward, I needed light to sleep. Even after I was old enough to know that toys could not become people, I could not look at that bench in darkness without seeing the same shape. A head, shoulders, a body sitting silently, waiting for me to move. The figure never returned. At least, I never saw it again. But the night changed the way I understood darkness. Before, darkness meant I could not see what was in the room. Afterward, it meant something could already be there, less than 10 feet away, watching me from a place I thought was empty. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I had a severe fear of dolls. It was not a mild discomfort. Dolls genuinely terrified me, especially the ones that looked too realistic or had painted expressions that seemed to change depending on the light. A lot of that fear came from watching the Chucky movies when I was much too young. After seeing those films, I could no longer look at dolls as harmless toys. Even when they were sitting still on a shelf, part of me expected their eyes to move. At night, their faces seemed different. A smile that looked friendly during the day could appear cruel in the dark. Because of that fear, I hated sleeping in complete darkness. My bedroom door always had to remain open, and the light in the hallway had to stay on. The light shone through the doorway just enough for me to see the floor, furniture, and familiar shapes around the room. As long as that light was there, I felt safe. I could look toward the open doorway and know that nothing was hiding in the darkness. If I woke during the night, I would immediately check the hall light. Seeing it still on helped me calm down and return to sleep. My family knew about this routine. My mother understood that I was frightened of the dark, so she usually made sure the hallway light remained on throughout the night. Around that time, my older sister came home to visit for a week during a break from university. She had already moved out, so having her home again felt special. I missed seeing her regularly, and I was excited that she would be staying with us for several nights. She slept in the spare bedroom down the hallway from mine. My sister also had a particular shirt she always wore as pajamas. It was a very long, oversized white t-shirt covered with cartoon images of famous basketball players. Across the back were the words "Slam Dunk." The shirt was so large that it hung down around her legs. She had owned it for years and wore it regularly, even after moving away for university. It was one of those pieces of clothing everyone in the family immediately associated with her. There was no mistaking it. If I saw that shirt, I knew it was my sister. On the first night of her visit, I went to bed as usual. My bedroom door remained open, and the hall light was left on. My mother went to bed at around 10 that evening. My sister stayed awake for another 20 minutes or so. Before going to the spare bedroom, she checked on me. I do not remember seeing her do this because I was already asleep, but she later told us she had looked into my room and made sure everything was normal. The hall light was still on at that point. Hours later, I suddenly woke. I do not remember hearing a noise first or having a bad dream. One moment I was asleep, and the next I was sitting upright in bed. The room looked normal. The hallway light was on exactly as it was supposed to be, casting a warm glow through the open doorway. I looked around and assumed everyone else was asleep. I was thirsty, so I considered getting out of bed and going to the kitchen for water. I moved the covers aside and lowered my legs toward the floor. Before I stood up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They sounded like bare feet moving across the wooden floor. The steps were soft but distinct. They came from the left side of my doorway in the direction of the spare bedroom where my sister was sleeping. At first, I was not afraid. I assumed it was my mother or sister walking to the bathroom or kitchen. The footsteps approached slowly. Then something passed in front of my open bedroom door. It looked like my sister, but it was not the correct size. It was a smaller version of her, about half her normal height. The figure had my sister's face, hair, and general appearance. It wore the same long white basketball shirt she used as pajamas. The cartoon players were printed across the fabric. The shirt was much too large for the figure, hanging almost to the floor because the body wearing it was so small. It looked like someone had taken my real sister and turned her into a life-size doll. The figure was not moving like a toy being carried. It walked on its own. Its bare feet touched the wooden floor, making the same sounds I had heard before it came into view. It moved slowly past the doorway without looking directly at me. The moment I saw it, my entire body went cold. I knew immediately that it was not my actual sister. The size alone made that impossible. My sister was an adult woman. This thing looked like a child-sized copy of her, but its proportions were strange in a way that reminded me of a doll. It was too exact to be a random child. The hair was hers. The face was hers. The shirt was hers. Even the way the oversized fabric hung around the small body matched what I would expect if someone created a miniature version of her. The figure appeared completely solid. It cast a shadow in the hallway light. I could hear its feet on the floor. I could hear it breathing. That detail has always stayed with me. The breathing was soft, but it was there. It was not the sound of a plastic toy or something mechanical. It sounded alive. As it walked, it also hummed quietly. I could not identify the tune. It was a gentle, absent-minded humming, the kind someone might make while walking through their own home. That calmness made it worse. The figure did not seem lost or frightened. It moved as though it belonged there. I wanted to call for my mother, but no sound came out. I wanted to pull my legs back beneath the covers, but my body would not move. All I could do was sit on the edge of the bed and watch. The small version of my sister crossed the hallway and approached the light switch. The switch was mounted at normal adult height. Because the figure was so short, it could not reach it while standing flat on the floor. It stopped in front of the wall. Then, it jumped. Its small hand struck the switch. The hallway light went out. The entire house became pitch black. The sudden darkness broke whatever had been holding me still. I panicked. I jumped from the bed and rushed toward the doorway. I could not see anything. The furniture, toys, and boxes in my room had become invisible. As I ran, I crashed into them, hitting my legs and knocking things aside. I did not care about the pain. I was convinced the doll-like figure was still in the hallway. Maybe it was standing directly outside my room. Maybe it had turned off the light so I could no longer see it moving toward me. I reached the bedroom door and slammed it shut. Then I pressed my whole body against it. I held the handle and pushed backward as hard as I could, trying to stop anything from entering. I began screaming. I screamed louder than I ever had before. I called for my mother and sister while crying uncontrollably. The darkness made it impossible to know what was happening on the other side of the door. I expected to feel the handle turn. I imagined the small figure pushing from the hallway, still wearing my sister's face and white shirt. For a few moments, nobody came. Then I heard my mother and sister rushing down the hall. They tried to open my bedroom door, but I was leaning against it with all my strength. I was so terrified that I did not understand they were the ones outside. My mother had to force the door open while I continued pushing against it from inside. Eventually, she managed to move me backward enough to enter. My sister turned the lights on. The bedroom filled with light again. My mother held me and tried to calm me down, but I could barely speak. I was sobbing so hard that my words came out broken. I kept looking at my sister. She was wearing the same oversized white shirt I had seen on the smaller figure. The cartoon basketball players were printed across it, and the words "slam dunk" were on the back. Seeing the real shirt made me panic again because it confirmed how accurately the thing had copied her. My sister was normal height. She looked confused and frightened by my reaction. My mother kept asking what had happened. Once I could speak clearly enough, I told them that a doll version of my sister had walked past my bedroom. I described its small size. I told them it had been wearing the same shirt. I explained that I had heard it walking, breathing, and humming. Then I said it had jumped up and switched off the hall light. Neither of them understood. They assumed I had suffered a nightmare. I had always been afraid of dolls, so a dream involving a doll-like version of my sister made sense to them. Maybe I had woken from the nightmare after the hall light had already gone out. In my confusion, I might have believed the dream happened while I was awake. That was the explanation they tried to give me. But there was a problem. The hallway light really was off when they came running. Both my mother and sister noticed it. My mother became annoyed with my sister and accused her of forgetting to leave the light on. She knew I was afraid of the dark and believed my sister had accidentally switched it off before going to bed. My sister insisted she had not touched it. She said she had left it on. She had even checked on me before entering the spare bedroom and remembered seeing the light shining into my room. My mother said she had also left the light on when she went to bed at around 10. Neither one had gotten up afterward. At some point, they looked toward the clock in my room. It was a Godzilla clock that I had owned for some time. The time was around 4 in the morning. That meant several hours had passed since both of them went to bed. The hallway light had remained on during that time, exactly as I remembered seeing when I woke. Then, something turned it off. I still remember the expression on my mother's face when they realized the timing. She did not suddenly say she believed me, but she looked unsettled. The situation no longer fit as easily into the explanation that my sister had forgotten the light. My sister continued swearing that she had not switched it off. She had gone directly to the spare bedroom after checking on me. My mother had been asleep in her own room. I had watched the smaller figure jump and hit the switch. The physical state of the hallway matched what I described. Still, they eventually decided I must have had a nightmare. Perhaps I woke after the light went off for some ordinary reason. The bulb could have flickered out, although it worked again when my sister turned it on. There might have been an electrical issue with the switch. Maybe one of them had gotten up in a half-asleep state, turned it off, and forgotten. My mother or sister could have been sleepwalking. That would explain why neither remembered touching the switch. But it would not explain the figure's size, even in darkness or while half asleep. My real sister could not appear half her normal height unless she was crawling, crouching, or viewed from a strange angle. The figure had walked upright. It had taken small steps. It had jumped to reach the switch. Maybe I experienced sleep paralysis. People who wake during certain stages of sleep can see vivid hallucinations in their actual bedroom. These figures often appear completely real and can make sounds, cast apparent shadows, or move through the environment. Sleep paralysis could explain why I was initially unable to move or speak. My fear of dolls could have shaped the hallucination. My sister's visit and familiar pajama shirt could have provided the face and clothing. My brain may have created a small doll version of her, because dolls were the thing I feared most. The hallucination could have ended when the hallway light went out for an unrelated reason, allowing me to move. That is a logical explanation. But during typical sleep paralysis, the person remains in bed and cannot move for some time. I had already sat upright and moved my legs from beneath the covers. I was thinking clearly enough to consider getting water. I heard the footsteps before seeing anything. The figure walked through a fully lit hall. It did not appear suddenly beside my bed like a dream image. It followed a continuous path from the spare bedroom across my doorway and toward the light switch. Then the physical light turned off. The sequence felt completely different from waking from a nightmare. Another possibility is that my sister really walked past my room. Perhaps she was crouched or bent over, making her appear much shorter. Maybe she went to switch off the hall light without realizing how important it was to me. I could have misinterpreted her shape because I was half asleep and frightened. But my sister denied leaving her room. She was sleeping until my screaming woke her. She also would not have needed to jump to reach the switch. Her breathing and humming might have been real, but the doll-like sighs would not make sense. A younger child could have been in the house, but no other child was staying with us. There was nobody else who could have matched my sister's face and clothing. The exact shirt is what makes the memory difficult to dismiss. It was not a generic white nightgown. The figure wore a very specific garment that belonged to my sister. I saw the cartoon basketball players. I recognized the oversized shape. When my sister came into my bedroom, she was wearing the same thing. My mind certainly knew the shirt. I had seen her wear it many times before, so it could have appeared in a dream. But the detail made the figure feel personal. It was not simply a frightening doll. It was a copy of someone I trusted. At that age, my sister's return home should have made me feel safer. Instead, something used her appearance to create the most frightening experience of my childhood. The humming also stays with me. I wish I could remember the melody. Sometimes I wonder whether it was a song my sister often hummed. Maybe hearing her make that sound earlier in the day influenced the dream or hallucination. Perhaps it was a tune connected to a cartoon or television program, but I cannot recall enough to identify it. I remember only the soft sound following the figure down the hallway. Its breathing seemed equally real. It inhaled and exhaled while walking, as though it had lungs. The sound was quiet enough that I might not have noticed it if the house had not been completely silent. Those sensory details are why the experience still affects me. A dream image can be vivid. But this had weight, sound, movement, shadow, and interaction with the house. The bare feet made contact with the wooden floor. The body blocked the hallway light and cast a shadow. The hand struck the switch. Then, the light went out. The darkness was not part of a dream. My mother and sister found the hallway dark when they woke. I have considered whether I might have switched the light off myself. Perhaps I sleepwalked into the hallway, turned it off, returned to bed, and then woke confused. My mind could have invented the doll to explain why the light was gone, but I clearly remember the light being on after I woke. I sat up and looked through the doorway. I considered walking to the kitchen because I could see the hallway. The figure appeared only afterward. If I had turned the light off earlier, the hall would already have been dark. The order of events is one of the clearest parts of the memory. Light, footsteps, the figure, the jump, darkness, then panic. Could the light have switched off automatically? Some switches are connected to timers, motion sensors, or loose wiring. Ours was a normal wall switch. The figure's jump and the loss of light happened at the same moment. Maybe the bulb failed precisely as I imagined the hand hitting the switch. But when my sister came, she restored the light by using the switch. The bulb had not burned out. Someone or something physically changed its position. I do not know whether my family checked the switch closely. In the confusion, the priority was calming me down. By the next day, the event was already being treated as a nightmare. No one examined the hallway for footprints or anything else unusual. There would probably have been nothing to find. The floor was inside the house, and bare feet would not necessarily leave marks. After that night, I refused to sleep with my bedroom door open. Before the incident, the open door and hallway light represented safety. They allowed me to see what was outside my room. Afterward, the open doorway felt like an entrance. The light had made it possible for me to see the thing walking past, but it had also allowed the thing to see into my room. Closing the door became more comforting than keeping the hallway visible. Even if the room was dark, I felt safer with a solid barrier between me and the corridor. That habit stayed with me. To this day, I do not like sleeping with a door open. It does not matter whether I am at home, visiting someone, or staying in a hotel. An open doorway makes me feel exposed. I imagine something moving through the hall and stopping just beyond the frame. Part of me expects to hear bare feet on wood. My mother and sister still cannot fully explain what happened. They continue to say it was probably a dream. From their perspective, that is the safest and most reasonable answer. I was a child with an intense doll phobia. I woke at 4 in the morning. I saw something that matched my greatest fear. Dreams and half-awake hallucinations are common in children. The fact that the hall light was off may have been a coincidence or something one of them did without remembering. I understand why they believe that. I would probably give the same explanation if another child told me this story. But I know how awake I felt. I remember the decision to get water. I remember moving my legs. I remember waiting for who I assumed was my mother or sister to pass. I did not wake screaming from an existing nightmare. The terror began only after I saw the small figure. Sometimes I wonder whether it noticed me watching. It never turned its head toward my room, at least not that I remember. It walked calmly to the switch, as if turning off the light had been its only purpose. Maybe it knew that darkness was what frightened me most. Perhaps it wanted to force me out of bed. If I had stayed frozen instead of running to close the door, what would it have done next? Would it have continued down the hallway? Would it have entered my room once I could no longer see? I do not know. I never heard it run away. There were no small footsteps after the light went out. The moment darkness filled the house, everything became silent except for my own movement and screaming. The figure could have remained directly outside the doorway. That thought was why I slammed the door so quickly. The experience may have been entirely psychological. A child's fear can create powerful images. The familiar appearance of my sister may have combined with my fear of dolls, producing something uniquely disturbing. The light switch could have been turned off by ordinary means at the exact wrong moment. A nightmare explanation would allow everything to remain safe and understandable. I prefer that explanation, but it has never felt complete. The doll version of my sister did not behave like a chaotic dream creature. It followed the layout of the house accurately. It came from the direction of the spare bedroom where she was sleeping. It wore the clothes she was wearing. It walked to the correct position of the hall switch. It understood that it was too short to reach and jumped. Then the real light went out. All these years later, I can still picture it passing the doorway. The oversized shirt almost touched the floor. The familiar cartoon basketball players moved with each step. Its face looked like my sister's, but smaller and too perfect, as though molded rather than alive. Its bare feet pressed softly against the wooden boards. It breathed. It hummed. Then it stopped at the wall and reached upward. I remember the small body jumping. I remember the click, and I remember the entire hallway disappearing into darkness. My family believes I woke because the light was already off and created the rest in a panic. But I know what I saw before it went dark. That was the last night I ever slept with my bedroom door open. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.